by having people carry mud and river rocks down up from Wills Creek and built trench lines underneath their fort and built the fort with wood on top of it. So underneath they had all these fortifications that would withstand bombardment, where they could have magazines that were fortified, protected by mud and rock, where they could store their food and store their water. All those things you'd have to store in case someone surrounded your fort and cut you off, knowing that the French would turn you over to the Indians for some horrible death. All right, so they had an idea. We may not have always liked the British, but they knew how to colonialize. They knew how to build fortifications. Now remember, all you're seeing is what's left of a segment of the trench lines that went underneath the fort, and of course when they built the fort on top of it, became tunnels. There were probably several others that have been since built in. Also, the fort would have been much bigger. If you look out on Washington Street, they've just put in all these new markers in granite. And I didn't realize how far some of those things went until they put them out. It's a much bigger area. And also think about the fort in terms of its lay of the land, the topography. This is high ground. Not high ground from the west end of Washington Street, but high ground from Green Street on down, okay? But when you go by, look at the size of some of these rocks. I'm hesitant to tell anybody to pull on some of them because some of them have been loosened over years, but it gives you an idea of how much human labor. The other thing, when this was built in 1755, at its peak prior to the Revolutionary War, they had 5,000 people up here. Now obviously all of them didn't live in the fort and they lived in the surrounding area, but in times of trouble everybody abandoned their homes and ran into the fort. So can you imagine 5,000 men, women, and children, since soldiers brought their families up here, what it was like? And then you had the whole
population of Cumberland?
What, right now?
Yeah.
The population of Cumberland now, if you go, since it's been annexed, I think is around 16. But within our area, I mean, so 5,000.
That's a lot of people.
A lot of people. It's a lot of water, it's a lot of food. Okay, we're going to go to the next section. You got a duck, and you can see the dents where people haven't made it.
Oh my. You gotta be kidding.
You can see what a great haunted tunnel this would be. Okay. Go. Everybody made it? No bleeding foreheads?
Not yet.
Okay, we're gonna go down there in a second. Alright. If anybody gets uncomfortable, the white tunnel's the way out if you need to leave, okay? That's where we'll leave at the, in about 7 minutes when we're done. Okay, the fort was eventually abandoned after the Revolutionary War by around, the early 1800s, 1804. It was a tavern and it was used by several different people as a meeting house. There was a church built here in the 1840s. A new rector by the name of Hillhouse Buell, who was significant in the church history, shows up in 1847. He has a new church cornerstone laid in 49 and builds a new church, what you see now up there, in 1851. The significance of that is it's just prior to the Civil War, and it's a very politically charged time. The Fugitive Slave Act has been passed in 1850. Buell is an abolitionist. We know that. He had been at several spots along the Underground Railroad before he got here. Buell was a person of wealth and of influence. His family was from upstate New York. He literally came here and had enough juice to have him build a whole new church with a new church with a church existing building that wasn't that old, and had him do it via a Philadelphia architect they had brought down. Somewhere around 1850, we know is fact, a man named Samuel Denson, D-E-N-S-O-N, shows up. He is a runaway slave from either Mississippi or Louisiana. Somehow he makes contact with Hillhouse Buell here. Hillhouse Buell makes him the sexton, for which he stays working for the church for the the next 30 years, as the sexton and as a runaway slave, he knew how to operate the Underground Railroad. These tunnels ran from here underneath Washington Street to what is the Allegheny County Library. Under the library was part of the church building. It was a school. To the law firm of Kirkwood and Rogers, which is one of the little townhomes on the opposite side of the library, and that was the rector's home. So this is a perfect place to hide people. There was a historian that came up from Howard County that had information that involved Denison and Buell, and basically Denison would signal people with the bells in a certain way, bring them through the tunnels here as they came up and followed the Potomac River to Wills Creek to make it into Maryland, because once they made it to Maryland and Cumberland, you're only 4 miles to 5 miles basically to Pennsylvania, bring them in here and then move them across the border. It was an illegal act. He probably didn't tell a lot of people he was doing it. The congregation at some time was divided over, the issue. They were divided after the war. Literally, people would sit, Southern sympathizers sat on one side of the church, Northern sympathizers sat on the other side of the church. And that went on after the war. Because Cumberland grew, there was no reason to have a colonial outpost here. It's all moving west. And so, construction materials, as they built quarries here, they just had better material to build with. The only reason some of this is left is that there's been a structure here since before the fort, and they just used it as foundation material. I mean, I have no idea what the rest of the tunnels were, or the trenches that have been filled in. What we do know is that this one, they have sealed off. This one leads from here to the library, which was the school at one time, to the rector's house, okay? All one spot. There was a steam line that ran through it. Denson, the sexton, was the escaped slave, was in charge of all these properties. That gave him cover to move at night. He would come in, stoke the boilers, keep the steam up, to keep everything hot. And of course, he didn't have to, he didn't have to go above ground, and he had an excuse. And he probably, frankly, had the protection of Buell. Again, Buell being someone of, power and influence, that if things got bad for Denson, he would move them out. Now that's speculation on my part, but that's kind of the way that I read the tea leaves in between the facts. And Denson stayed here and is buried here in Cumberland, Rose Hill Cemetery, into the 1880s. And he showed up sometime in the early 1850s. All right, and was influential in the African American community after the Civil War. In fact, he founded what is basically the other Episcopal Church, Holy Cross, which is up by Memorial Hospital. Now, these got filled in somewhere in the late 60s and early 70s. I know people that have been into these tunnels. They go, as I've told you, to the old library, okay? And they were sealed off at the library when they would play in. But there's also an offshoot that goes to the parking lot area to the right of the library. Apparently at one time here in Cumberland, someone may help me on this, there was a massive house that was there, that you face the library off in that parking lot area, well before my time. But anyway, those tunnels did exist, and apparently if you ever get the chance to legend, the law firm, you can see the entrance from their basement that goes to the other side of that tunnel. Well, yeah, it was structurally unsound. You have major traffic now going across Washington Street with heavy trucks. I mean, these weren't fortified trenches. They're just mud, and they are what you see, mud and rocks. I mean, and you can see in the corner areas here where they're actually used as foundation material. That's all had to be.
We're making these bird calls. You people are crazy. I ain't making these bird calls now. Yeah, that's you know. Awesome. Okay.